Welcome to the third video of active and passive voice. We're going to continue our discussion regarding how to change from active into passive. We were discussing the rules and we have reached rule number 3. Now rule number 3 is regarding the change of voice of imperative sentences. Imperative sentences are generally advice, suggestions, requests, commands or orders, and such sentences do not have a subject, और जिन sentences का subject नहीं होता, for them it becomes a little tricky to convert into passive voice. Because rule number 1 हमने क्या study किया था, that when you're changing from active to passive, the subject of the active voice becomes the object of the passive. But in imperative sentences, the active voice does not have a subject, but it is assumed that you are talking to the person and that person is your subject. So we use the pronoun you as the subject of the sentence while converting into passive voice. There are a few ways in which you can convert from active to passive of imperatives. We'll start with the first one. The first one is by beginning the sentence of passive voice with the word let. Now, in order to begin our sentences with let, how to do? Help the poor is the given sentence in active voice. I need to start with let. So okay, I would write the first word as let, but I need to go back to rule number 1 and 2 of active and passive. Okay, we need to go back to rule number 1 and 2. Rule number 1 states that subject of the active becomes the object and the object becomes the subject. Now my object is the poor, right? And I need to write the word the poor after let. जो भी object है उसे मुझे लिखना है as per the format. So help the poor becomes let the poor be helped. Now be is a part of the format. आपको main verb add करना है. So be and helped हम लिखते हैं because help का हमें V3 form use करना होता है. Rule number 2 that you need to use the past participle form of the verb. So help the poor becomes let the poor be helped. Right? Another example. Switch off all the lights. And the passive voice, I need to begin with the word let. फिर object को use करना है. All the lights is the object. So I would write let all the lights. Be is part of the format and switched off. Switch का switched हो जाएगा because I need to use the V3 form of the verb, right? So this is one way in which you can convert into passive voice. The other way is to begin your answer with your ordered to, your requested to, your advised to, your suggested to. ऐसे आप begin कर सकते हो. Because as we assume that the person you're talking to is the subject of the sentence and we address them using the pronoun you. Let us take an example. Work hard. ये एक advice है, ये एक suggestion है. So we can begin our answer with you're advised to or you're suggested to. Right? So you're advised to work hard. That is how you can write. Another example, clean your room. Again, now this can be an advice or it can be an order. Let us take it as an order. So I begin my answer with you're ordered to clean your room. But begin with you're ordered to. In this manner, you can convert imperatives from active into passive. The first is by using let and the second is by beginning the answer with your ordered to, your requested to or your advised to. Okay, so after imperatives comes the interrogatives. Interrogatives मतलब questions. भी questions को passive voice में कैसे change कर सकते? Well, again there are few methods. You need to keep in mind how the question begins. Depending on how the question begins, there are different ways of converting that question into passive voice, right? First one, when the active voice starts with do, does or did, at that time in passive voice you need to start the answer with am, is or are if it is in present or was, were if it is in past. For example, did you watch the show? Starts with did. Then you need to start with Was the show watched by you? Now how did I convert this? Well, did था इसके लिए मैंने start किया was or were, but my object is the show. The show singular है, that is why I chose was. Was the show. Watch है, उसका V3 form use करना है. Rule 1, 2 को हमें याद ही रखना है. They are always to be followed, right? Was the show watched by you? That is how you can answer. Now, another way you can convert the question, if the question begin with has, have or had. That is, अगर question जो है, it is in perfect tense, has, have, had से begin करता है, then you need to use the format has been, have been, had been in your answer of passive voice. For example, have you seen this movie? तो have से begin करता है, and my object is this movie. So this movie is singular, इसलिए I would begin my answer with has. Has this movie? Has के बाद मुझे been use करना है. So has this movie been seen by you? That is how you answer. And last but not the least, if the question in active voice begins with the word who, अगर who से question begin करता है, then passive voice you need to begin with by whom. Who gifted you this watch? Then I would begin with by whom was this watch gifted to you? Now to discuss the next rule is when we have sentences with modals. Modal verbs होते हैं, उसके साथ जो sentences है, there's a little different way in which you can convert them into passive voice. और एक ही trick हमें use करनी है, that we have to use the verb be after the modal. See, if the active voice contains modals like can, could, may, might, shall, should, will, would, must or ought to, then in the passive voice we have to follow the following format. That is, we need to use modal plus the verb be. For example, you should complete your work on time. In this case, you is the subject, should is the verb, and it is a modal verb. Complete your work on time. So your work here is the object. Now रूल नंबर 1, 2 जो हमने डिस्कस किए थे वो फॉलो होंगे, उसके साथ हमें रूल नंबर 5 को फॉलो करना है. हाउ? जो ऑब्जेक्ट है दैट विल बिकम माय सब्जेक्ट. योर वर्क शुड बी completed. Should be यूज हुआ because should is a modal verb and modal verb plus the verb be is to be used as per the format. The work should be completed. Complete का completed हो गया because always V3 form of the verb is to be used, right? Work should be completed on time by you. Another example, must not make noise in the library. You is the subject, must is the modal verb, not make noise in the library, and noise is the object. I would start the sentence in passive voice with the word noise. Must है तो must का क्या हो जाएगा? Must not है, it will become must not be. Make becomes made because the verb is to be used in V3 form. Made in the library by you. Noise must not be made in the library by you. In this way you can convert sentences containing modals in the passive voice. Now we have discussed about 5 rules so far in order to change the voice of different kind of sentences, right? Active और passive voice का basic meaning अगर हम revise करें तो यही होता है that it shows whether someone is doing the action or simply that the action is being done. If it is the active, we try to say that someone is doing the action. While if it's the passive voice, we try to say that the action is simply being done, right? And one rule which we need to remember thoroughly is that we always use the V3 form of the verb in passive voice, and that we should not change the tense of the sentence. And keeping these 2 things in mind, we change different kinds of sentences into passive voice. And the reverse has to be done while you try to change the voice from passive to active. This was the last video of the series in active and passive voice. I hope you guys would now have thorough knowledge of the topic. Thank you.